All right, here we go. So as Jason said, my name is Erin Jones. I am an instructor of integrated pest management at West Texas A&M University in Canyon, which is up by Amarillo, if you're not familiar with it. I'm also a county extension agent in Randall County, and I specialize in horticulture for the county. Um, I also teach agricultural-based classes, so I've got a pretty good background there in both horticulture and agriculture. And I am also a honeybee researcher. So I didn't put that on this slide. I probably should have put it. So I am a PhD student at West Texas A&M University, and I am working in the honeybee lab at Texas A&M in College Station. So I'm here for the summer in College Station doing a research project with honeybees. And if I have time at the end, I'll talk a little bit about my project that I'm doing. So a little bit about today's outline. I'll talk a little bit about identifying insects. I know that when we are trying to control them, knowing what we're trying to control is always one of our biggest feats, is understanding what that insect is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'll go over a few basic pests that you may or may not be familiar with, things that I often see and questions that I often get in my roles. Then I'll cover some integrated pest management techniques. And when I get to chemical control, I'll talk some about modes of action. So how chemicals are actually controlling insects, how I guess how they're interacting together. So I'll talk some about modes of action. I'm not going to cover all of them today because there's a lot of things to know there, but I'm going to give you guys some resources so that you can find additional information on your own if that is something that's interesting to you. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about honeybees, a little bit about how we can remove them, what we can do if you're working in structural pest control. I don't know if you guys are working in horticulture or agriculture or structural pest control or where you are. So I'll just try to talk about a variety of things, hoping that I can touch on everybody's interest there. So one of the first things I like to start out with is just giving you guys a resource. This is a book that I often use. This here is the front of the book. It is a field guide to common insects in Texas. And what I really like about this book is that it talks about adult and larval or nymphal stages of insects. So I chose this page here. Sorry, I just took a picture of the page so you guys could see what it looks like inside. But I chose the tomato hornworm for us to look at because I think everybody is probably familiar with the tomato hornworm. We've all seen it before. And we all know that the larval form is a pest. Let me move that out of the way. I don't know if that's in the way for you guys. There we go. So the larval form is a pest that we see in our tomato plants, right? Maybe you grew up picking them off of tomato plants for your grandma. I did. We would pick them off the tomato plants and then feed them to her chickens. So maybe you grew up doing that, maybe not. Maybe you're not familiar with them, but they are a pretty large worm here. If we look at the description of them, 4 to 5 inches is how large they can be. Oh, sorry, that's talking about the adult. Let me see if it says the size of the hornworm. Oh, it doesn't say. Okay, so the hornworm, 3 to 4 inches. There we go. So 3 to 4 inches in length. And then the adult form of that is actually one of our sphinx moths that we have here in Texas. So the larval form we would consider a pest, but the adult form we wouldn't consider a pest. It visits flowers and feeds on nectar. And can do some pollination for us. So I really like this book. I like to kind of show it to people. It's a very inexpensive resource that you can buy on Amazon for less than $10. So this is something that you can buy for your crews that they can have in their pickups that can easily help them to access common insects that they may be finding. So this is just an example of something that I like to use that is affordable. I know sometimes when we start looking at textbooks, they can be really expensive, but this is a good one for people to use. So that's a good resource for identification. And when we go to look at identification, a lot of times we'll see things about the life cycle. So We all learned about metamorphosis when we were in elementary school. We learned about the butterfly metamorphosis, right? And they have complete metamorphosis. So that's where we see the adult is looking very, very different from the larva or from the caterpillar that we might find. And that's important for us to know for identification. So when we go to control them, we can have some idea of what we're looking at. Insects can also have incomplete metamorphosis. So showing over here on the other side of the screen with the grasshopper, they start out as an egg. They have several nymphal stages that typically look a lot like the adult. When we talk about grasshoppers, they do look like the adult. But then when we get into the order Hemiptera, we find that the nymphs really don't look that much like the adults. So when we go to look at a resource, it may tell us the type of metamorphosis that that insect has. And the reason that is important is for identification purposes and also for control purposes. So if I am trying to control the tomato hornworm, I know that I need to apply something that is going to be eaten by the larva. It is not something that is going to control the adult because they are feeding on the flowers unless it's something that I spray directly onto the adult. But if I'm trying to have it be something I'm going to spray onto the leaves and they're going to eat it and die, then I know that I need to spray it during that nymphal stage, or sorry, during that larval stage when I'm seeing them. So identification and control are reasons why the life cycle of insects is really important for us to know. And we can identify the type of metamorphosis they have based on the order that they belong to. So insects fall into different orders or for classification. So when we look up an order of insects, we'll be able to find the type of metamorphosis that they have. So then when we catch our insect and we're trying to identify it, one of the main things that we can look at for identification is going to be their mouth parts. So I just put two examples of mouth parts on here that I think most people are familiar with. There are more types of mouth parts. And when we go to read books with identification, or if you're using some type of online resource, we will see information about their mouth parts. So we can look that information up. And generally we can tell what order they fall into based on their mouth part type. So here I've got an example of chewing mouth parts. So we have grub worms on here. So grub worms are the larval form of June bug. I'll show you guys that in just a second. But for the order that beetles fall into, it's called Coleoptera. They have chewing mouth parts during their larval stage and during their adult stage as well. So if we're trying to identify Coleoptera or a beetle, we know that they always have chewing mouth parts. Caterpillar larvae. So if we're looking at something that falls into the order Lepidoptera, so that's going to be our moths and butterflies. As caterpillars, they do have chewing mouth parts, but then as adults, they have siphoning mouth parts, or maybe no mouth parts at all. Some moths don't even feed as adults. They only feed in their larval stage. So looking at the mouth parts of caterpillars can help us to identify them. Let's see, leaf beetles. So we think about maybe an elm leaf beetle that feeds on elm trees. Those guys are going to have chewing mouth parts because they are beetles. They fall into the order Coleoptera. And then grasshoppers always have chewing mouth parts. So anything in their order, which is Orthoptera, will have chewing mouth parts. So another mouth part type is piercing sucking mouth parts. So we've got aphids, leafhoppers, scales, mealybugs. They all fall into the order Hemiptera, and they all have those piercing sucking mouth parts that they are piercing into plants and drawing out the nutrients. So definitely considered a plant pest. And then I would put mosquitoes on there just because that's very easy for us to envision. If you haven't looked at a lot of insect mouth parts and thought about them much before, mosquitoes are something that's pretty easy for us to imagine because we have all been bitten by a mosquito before. I always tell my college students, I always dare them to let a mosquito land on their arm and let it feed on them and watch it fill up with blood. As an entomologist, that's something that I have done before. It's really neat because you can see the blood filling up into their little bodies. For a lot of people, that is really gross. But when you're thinking about mouth parts, it's a really great way to see that actual piercing, sucking mouth part working. So these are just two examples of insect mouth parts. There are lots of different types that you can come across, but they are a really great identification tool when you're looking at mouth parts. So now I'm going to talk about a few common pests that you may see. I've got a little bit of diversity here within the types of pests that I'm going to talk about. If you have any questions, please ask me along the way, and I'll try to keep an eye on the chat there. I'm trying to find where the chat is. Okay. All right. Maybe I'll just open it. Okay. No questions in the chat. Great. So aphids are a really common problem that we have in horticulture and in agriculture as well. So they do have those piercing, sucking mouth parts that they are piercing into the plant and drawing out the nutrients. Unfortunately, they can vector diseases to plants, not to humans. So that is good news about them, but to plants they can. So when they go and feed on one plant that is infected with a disease, with a virus or a bacteria, they travel to another plant. When they insert their mouth parts, that virus or bacteria can be spread to the next plant. So similarly, if we think about mosquitoes spreading diseases with humans, say malaria, if I had malaria, a mosquito was feeding on me and you were sitting next to me and it hopped over and fed on you, it could spread malaria to you. So insects and plants have relationships like that with viruses, bacteria, fungi. Those are the pathogens that can be found on plants. So a lot of them, especially viruses, can be vectored by insects with piercing, sucking mouth parts. So aphids, there's some variety in the type of aphid that you may see up here in this first little sentence. I have a list of them. So a lot of times we just call them green bugs. That is a general name that we use for them, but that is actually a type of aphid. We can have sugarcane aphids. Russian wheat aphids are a pest in wheat that do vector a disease to them, a virus to them. Green peach aphids are often found in greenhouse situations. We can have outbreaks of them. Tobacco aphids can spread diseases between plants in the Solanaceae family. And then we've got melon aphids that we may find feeding on our melons. And there are lots of different kinds of aphids. These are just some examples of them. So they do have the piercing, sucking mouth parts that they will pierce into the xylem of the plant and they begin feeding. When they do, there's a lot of pressure on their body from the xylem of the plant, and it actually can cause these little, we call them honeydew droplets, to come out of their cornicles, which are these, they look like little tailpipes on the back. So sometimes we'll see little honeydew droplets coming out of the back of them. And it is because the pressure inside of the aphid is so much from their mouth parts being pushed into the xylem of the plant. And that is a very, very sticky substance. So we call it honeydew. It can cover the leaf of the plant and it can actually prevent photosynthesis because the plant cannot exchange gases with the air. They can't go through their respiration that they need to do for photosynthesis. So it can be really negative for the plant for basic functions. It can also allow for mold, like a sooty mold, to begin to grow because it is really sugary coming out of the back of the aphids and settling onto the plants. It can be a very sugary, sticky substance. And sooty mold can begin to grow. So aphids can have some secondary problems that they cause for us, and they can definitely be problematic. The adults, the females, can give birth to live young without mating. So not a lot of insects can do that, but some of them can, and aphids are one of them. So they don't actually have to find a mate to begin reproducing, and they can begin reproducing before they are adults. So during their juvenile stages, they can actually begin giving birth to young. So the young are clones of the mother because there's no mating taking place. So a lot of cool things about aphids, but they definitely are pests for us. Let me see, my slide won't advance. Sorry, guys, my computer is frozen. Okay, here we go. Okay, sorry, I don't know, I was frozen there. So a little fun side note about aphids and about the honeydew that they produce. Um, some ant species actually farm aphids. So the ants want to eat this honeydew that comes out of the back of the aphid. So the honeydew is a little sticky droplets I was talking about that can settle onto the plants. So some ants like to eat this sticky substance that comes out of them. So here we can see the little cornicles. That is where the honeydew comes from. We actually see the ant in this picture eating the honeydew. So if we see a lot of ants on plants, look at the underside of the leaves and see if you do see an aphid population there. So in exchange for getting to eat the honeydew from the aphids, the ants provide like security for them or defense for them, and they will actually chase away insects that want to eat the aphids. So they'll chase away like ladybugs or lacewings. So they're actually defending them. So it's a little symbiotic relationship there. So if you see a lot of ants crawling up and down a plant, look at the underside of the leaf and see if you see some aphids there and see if you can see that interaction between them. It's a pretty common thing. So that's just a little fun side note. Doesn't really have a lot to do with pest control, but something that I think is really interesting. The next pests we have are thrips. So thrips are very small. On this slide, I say that we have Western flower thrips and the Texas Panhandle because that's where I usually give this presentation. But I know you guys are from all over the state, and I don't actually know what species of thrips are found throughout the whole state of Texas. But I do know that Western flower thrips are really common in this state. So unfortunately, they can vector diseases. So they do have these, they have rasping, sucking mouth parts that they kind of chop into the plant and they're like sucking up at the same time as they're doing it. And they can vector disease to them, especially in tomatoes. So I can't tell you how many times people will bring me their tomato and it has tomato spotted wilt on it and it is vectored by these thrips. And there's very little you can do about it because thrips are really small, they move very fast, and it is hard to control them or hard to control the diseases that they vector. So you may have seen them. They will bite humans. They're very small, cigar-shaped insects. If you go out in a grassy field or in a wheat field and you wear a white shirt or a yellow shirt in the spring, you'll be covered in them, and they will bite us. They don't leave any marks like a whelp like a mosquito does. They just feel kind of irritating when they're biting you because they're chopping into you with those little chopping mouth parts, trying to see if you're a plant that they can feed on. So thrips are definitely a problem. We deal with them in ornamental horticulture with flowers, buds, and then in horticulture with fruits. They do damage flowers before the flower will open. A lot of times thrips will go in and feed on those little petals as they're developing. And then when they open up, we'll see brown or yellowish spots on them and makes the flower not as desirable for us. So thrips are a big problem. I see them a lot in rose bushes. We often see them before the bud opens. So that's what thrips are. That's what they look like. They're very small in size. If you're dealing with turf grass at all, June bugs can be a big pest. So the larval form of a June bug is a grubworm. Here we see a picture of a grubworm. So grubworms live in, they feed on roots. Turf grass is usually where we see them as problems, but they'll feed on a lot of different types of roots. So as they're feeding on the roots, they cause the plant to be dwarfed, or we could see yellowing. We can even see death of the plants. So we're all familiar with the adult June bug. They come, a lot of times they're brown. They can be many different sizes. Sometimes there is a green version that I've got a picture of here. And when we go to control grub worms, we may see that the insecticides that we want to use say that we should apply them during a certain time of year. And this is really important for us to know because of their life cycle. So I'm going to start out over here in January. So we've got at the beginning of the year, we've got grub worms that are 3 to 12 inches below the surface. So if we're going to try to apply a pesticide, that may not be the best time because they're not feeding, they're probably dormant, and they're too far down below the surface. So we can see here that in March and April, they are going to move up and begin feeding on the grasses. So that may be a time when the insecticide label says that we need to apply. Then we've got here where they're pupating in May and June. So during that pupal stage, they're not going to be feeding. Think about a butterfly in a cocoon. That is the butterfly pupal stage. So this is very similar. Where they're pupating, they're not feeding. There's no movement within that insect. They are developing into an adult. So then in June, July, that is when we see the adult form. That's when they're at night, they're flying to the light when we are sitting outside, or we're seeing them in various places. And those adults are just looking for a mate to breed, and then the female will lay the eggs. And you can see here that she's laying the eggs in the soil. Then we've got that egg hatching in in August and September. And in October, they're feeding very rapidly, getting very large. So they're building up to get ready for overwintering. And then we see that grub going further down into the soil and overwintering further down. So this is a really great graphic to show you the times that you need to be applying pesticides for them. And this is just a graphic that I found online. You can look up June bug life cycle and find it very easily if this is something that you want to show to other people. All right. The next pest I have is corn earworm. So when we talk about these corn pests, corn earworm is one that people are very familiar with. You know, we've all had a ear of corn that we pulled back and we found a corn earworm that is feeding underneath the husk on those corn kernels that we wanted to eat, and they have left behind their poop in our on our corn cob. In entomology, the word we use for poop is frass. That is our entomological word for poop. So we find their frass, we find them, and it is gross, right? We don't like that at all. So there are many different corn pests that are in the order Lepidoptera. So they are moths as adults. And then when we see the caterpillars, they're often in our corn. Unfortunately, they can move into other plants as well. So they can move into our ornamental plants or into vegetable plants, depending on what is available to them, especially after harvest. Once the corn has dried out, the farmers have come through and harvest and removed their food source. Those adults are going to be looking for somewhere to lay eggs. And unfortunately, that can be our gardens at our homes or other crops that are in the area. That they are often generalists and can feed on more than one type of plant. Let's see. We do see them as pests as adults. So I put this picture here. We've probably all been to a football game or some type of event where there were lights at night in the fall and there were thousands of these moths. So they can be problematic in their adult form, not necessarily because they're feeding, but just because of the sheer number of them that we can find in the fall or early in the spring, we can see them as well. So we do have, for Lepidopteran pests, we do have some genetic the light in the room turned off. I'm so sorry. Hold on. I haven't been moving enough to keep it on. There, it turned on. Sorry. It's one of those automatic lights on and sensor. So we do have some genetic modifications that have been done within corn to control them. So we have one that is called BT. So BT is Bacillus thuringiensis. It is actually a gene from a bacteria that is naturally found in the soil. Scientists have inserted this into corn plants. I think maybe potatoes also have BT in them now. And when the Lepidopteran pests feed on these plants, they are not able to digest what they're eating and they'll die. So it is a way that the plants are resistant or genetically modified to be resistant to these corn pests. So we do have some defense within agriculture against them. I don't think within horticulture that there is much. Let me look here. So I I actually grew up, I'm sorry, there's a question in the chat says, what city was this taken? What city was this picture taken in? So I grew up in a town called Nazareth that is between Amarillo and Lubbock. So up in the Texas Panhandle, it is a farming community. And that's where I took this picture, was at a Friday night football game at the high school. So it was up in the Panhandle is where I took the picture. All right, so let's keep going. Let me see. Sorry, my computer keeps freezing. I don't know why that's happening. Let's see. So I put emerald ash borer on here as a common pest that you guys might see. It may be an ornamental pest that you're seeing. So here I've got a picture of the adult. This picture is way blown up. They're actually pretty small, but this is what the adult form looks like. Because they are beetles in the order Coleoptera, they do have a larval form. So the larvae live within the plant, within the tree, ash trees, and feed inside the trunk. So here is some damage that we may see. So we may see thinning of the plant towards the top, and then down towards the bottom, we may see these suckers coming out as that tree is trying to survive. So this may be the damage that you see. And here is what it may actually look like when you're looking for it. So we can see small holes in ash trees where the adults are boring in. And then if we are to pull back the bark, we can see this damage here. So, or we can see where the insect was feeding and leaving behind its frass. So when we go to look for insects, that is something that I always look for. The waste that they have, like when they're pooping, they're not going to go to the restroom to relieve themselves like we are. They're going to poop wherever they are, and they're going to leave it behind. So when I go to look for insect damage, that is something that I'm looking for if I'm trying to decide, is this a nutrient deficiency? Is this a disease, or is this an insect? What is happening here with this plant? If we see some type of symptoms on it and I'm trying to do some diagnosis, I always look for insect frass, and that helps me to determine if it is actually an insect that has been there visiting the plant. Okay, so here we can see the emerald ash borer frass that has been left behind, and then also the tunneling if we're to pull back the bark there. All right, so we've talked about some pests. I'm sure you guys incur tons and tons more pests than that. There are so many insects to be able to identify and know facts about. Those are just a couple common ones that I come across that people often ask me questions about. If you have more questions, you can type in the chat, or at the end, I'll give you guys my email address, and you're more than welcome to send me any questions that you have, and I'll try my very best to identify things or help you with control. If you have something that you're not able to control, I'll try really hard to be able to help you. So those are just some pests that you may be incurring or you may have questions about. So when we talk about control, we always want to prevent as if possible. So how could we prevent insects? I'll talk a little bit about that. We need to identify the problem. So that can be one of the biggest challenges for people who are not working in entomology, or even for me. There are things that people bring me that I'm like, I don't actually know what that is. Let me look it up. So sometimes identifying things can be a real challenge, but in each of your counties, you should have a county extension agent who should be able to help you. There are tons of resources online. At the end, I'll show you some resources that I utilize that I think are trustworthy. Sometimes you get into something, you're like, gosh, I don't even think this resource is right. So I'll show you some things that I use that I think are trustworthy and that I give to my students to utilize. So we want to prevent, we want to identify, and then we want to implement an integrated pest management program if we can. So IPM is what I teach at the university. And it is it is our main tool for controlling insects. So let's talk about what is IPM. So when we talk about IPM, we have these different control measures. So we have cultural control, biological control, mechanical control, genetic control, and then chemical control is our very last one. We've all seen our IPM triangle, right, where we have chemical control at the very top. We want to use it the least, but it is often our go-to because it is quick and works really well when it works. When it doesn't work, then we've got more problems. So we'll talk about genetic resistance within, or chemical resistance within insects there here at the end too. So when we talk about cultural control, what can we do? So these are management techniques that we would be using anyways, but we're going to modify them in some way to control our pest. So crop rotation is here at the top. If you're not familiar with agriculture, it is just like it sounds. We are rotating our crops from one crop to another. A lot of times we will have pests that feed on a certain type of plant. So if I'm growing corn every year and I've got my corn pests, if I will rotate to something that is a dicot instead of a monocot in a different plant family, a lot of times that can break that cycle in the pest population and allow me to gain some control. Let's see, irrigation and fertilization, those two kind of go together with plant health. I always tell people, make sure you're growing the right plant in the right place. If you're trying to grow a plant that doesn't grow in the area that you're growing it in, it's not going to be that healthy and it's going to be more susceptible to insects and diseases. And then sanitation. So when we think about people, we think about sanitation, we think about washing our hands. Well, with plants, we aren't going to be able to wash them, are we? But we can remove anything that has a disease or a pest in it. So if you are have a tree that has borers in it and you don't want to remove the whole tree, but you have branches that clearly have damage, you can remove them and cut them off of the plant and then remove them from the area. So don't just keep them in the area, you know, put them in the wood pile, because those insects are going to move back into your trees from your wood pile. That it is not, you need to remove them or burn them, you know, if you have the opportunity to burn. So biological control is our next tactic that we talk about in IPM. This is one of my very favorite ones, where we can use insects to control other insects or insects to control plants. I always think biological control is really fun. So BT corn falls under here. I mentioned BT earlier, where we're using a gene from a bacteria and they have inserted it into plants. But this is also something that you can buy. You can buy BT and you can spray it onto your plants, and it will, they have one that controls Lepidopteran pests, and then they also have one for Dipteran pests. So that will kill mosquitoes. The dunks that we put into the mosquito or into water that can be have BT in it that will kill mosquito pests. And it does work on other lepidopterans like fruit flies. People tell me, oh, I've got, you know, fruit flies in my houseplants. And I tell them, oh, you can buy this BT granular that is for mosquitoes and put that into the soil of your houseplant, and it will kill those larvae of the fruit flies. It'll actually kill dipteran larvae. So we've got a couple of different kinds there, and that's something you can look up more information about if you're interested in those types of control. And then we can utilize beneficial insects. So these may be ladybugs, might be lacewings. There's a few different ones, and we'll look at those in just a second. But biocontrol is a pretty cool way where we are controlling our insect pests using other insects. So the first one we have here is ladybugs. So ladybugs are, we've all seen the adult ladybug, but the larval form can look a little different. So here we have the larva. This is what they look like when they're pupating, and these are smaller larvae. So if that's something that you're finding, sometimes people find them and they're like, oh my gosh, I found this weird thing. It has spines all over it, and it's a ladybug. So, and those larvae are the ones that are doing a lot of feeding. So if you've got anything that is soft-bodied, they can eat insect eggs, they can eat caterpillars, they can eat mites, aphids, mealybugs, scales. They eat a whole variety of things. So there are several different types of ladybugs, and this is just one of them that we commonly see. So here we have the praying mantis. So this is something that if you have praying mantis, it's pretty cool to have them. I always think they're fun to watch. This is actually what the egg case looks like. Sometimes people will bring me those and they'll say, I found this weird thing outside that I don't know what it is. And it'll be an egg case from a praying mantis. So they are predators. They're feeding on other insects. Sometimes we do see them waiting at flowers to catch pollinators. So will see them eating pollinating flies or honeybees. So I don't think they're going to deplete a honeybee population by any means, but sometimes we do see them eating beneficial insects as well. Here's our lacewings. So lacewings are really cool. They're in the order Neuroptera. Here I have a green lacewing on this picture. We also have brown lacewings in the state of Texas. And this is what their larvae look like. They have these really big mandibles on the front of them that they're using to grab things and pull them into their mouths. And the larvae are really ferocious predators of, once again, anything soft-bodied. So if we have thrips, mealybugs, immature flies, any type of caterpillar, they can grab them and eat them. And this is what their eggs look like. So their eggs kind of look like a little tiny football on a thread. So the female actually makes this little thread and then puts the egg on top of it. So that's kind of interesting. And that's something that people will sometimes send me a picture of and say, hey, I found this weird thing. What is it? And it's those guys because they look really interesting. And they're often in a circle. They'll lay their eggs in a circle. So they're fun to find. Let's see, other beneficials. So within the group of ground beetles, they're called carabids. We've got a variety of different kinds, and we'll find them underneath logs or boards. We'll find them crawling on the ground. We'll find them crawling in trees, and they are catching other insects and eating them. This one here in the middle, that green one, is one of my favorite insects. It is called a caterpillar killer because they catch lepidopteran caterpillars and consume them. And I've actually kept them as pets before, catch them outside and bring them into the lab. And I take them to show kids when I teach kids about insects. So if you're doing some education with the kids and you can catch one of them, you can feed them caterpillars, or the kids can feed them caterpillars and then watch them eat. So that's something fun to do with them. Let's see, beneficial wasps. So these are pretty cool guys. They do fall under biocontrol. So these are going to be our parasitic wasps, where they're actually laying an egg inside of another insect. A really common one people often think of is the tarantula hawk. So the tarantula hawk will lay an egg inside of a tarantula. The little wasp larva, the egg will hatch inside the tarantula. The wasp larva will live inside of there and eat the inside of the tarantula until it's ready to pupate, and then the tarantula will die and the adult wasp will emerge. So that's an example that people know about, but there are many, many different types of beneficial wasps. Over here on the bottom, I've got one that is laying an egg inside an aphid. And that aphid will die. This caterpillar in the middle is our tomato hornworm that we looked at the very beginning. And these are actually parasitic wasp pupa that are on the outside of it. So those wasps are pupating on the outside. So there are many different types of parasitic wasps. People often feel afraid of them when they see them because they do have these long ovipositors and they think, oh my gosh, this thing is going to sting me. They're not actually stinging anyone. They are laying eggs inside of other insects. So parasitic wasps are really neat. So those are some examples of biocontrol that we can use when we talk about IPM. We can also use mechanical control. So this can be plowing, mowing, or pruning. Sometimes this is actually just out picking the insects off and smashing them can be a way of that we can see in mechanical control. And then we get to genetic control. So this is where we see our genetically modified organisms. There's a lot of controversy with them, if they are okay for us to consume or not. Most corn that we consume is genetically modified with the BT that I mentioned earlier. If we didn't have BT, I don't think we would have corn because our corn pests are so extreme. But plant breeding can also fall under genetic pest control, where we are not modifying the plants, but we are breeding for resistance. So we do have, some rose bushes that are more resistant to aphids, or we have some vegetable crops that are more resistant to thrips. So we can have different types of resistance that we see in some plants, and we can do breeding with other plants in the same group to to have them be more resistant to our pests. So this is another tool that we have in our toolbox. And then last of all, we have chemical control is our last part of IPM. Sorry, I need to get a drink. All right. So when we talk about chemical control, I feel like you guys probably have pesticide applicator licenses and are pretty familiar with chemical control. But I always like to stress chemical safety. So we always want to read the label. The label is the law, and we always want to follow it. We only want to use approved chemicals. We don't want to use anything that is no longer on the market because it can be really harmful to us as humans. We want to use the lowest level of toxicity possible. So for whatever reason, we think that if a little is good, then a lot is better, right? That's kind of like our human way of thinking about things. But with pesticides, that is not what we need to do. The researchers who created these pesticides put a lot of time and effort and money into finding the exact amount of chemical that needed to be used to control the insect. So that research has already been done for you, so you don't have to test it to see if it would work or not. You just need to follow the label. We want to use the right equipment. So if it says we need a certain sprayer nozzle, then we need to use that. Only use when needed. Sometimes we think, oh, I had a problem with that pest last year and I'm going to get ahead of it and I'm going to treat before it comes. But we want to be sure that we are monitoring and identifying those pests before we are applying anything. We'll talk about insect resistance in just a second. Let's see. So we want to wear PPE. We want to keep ourselves safe. We want to keep our employees safe, make sure we are providing the PPE for them that they need. Dispose of containers properly. So we don't want a bunch of containers laying around that have maybe some chemicals left in them. We want to dispose of them. Apply in good weather. Goodness, I get so many complaints from people who their neighbor has sprayed weeds and killed their tree or killed their rose bush at the extension center. I'm constantly getting these complaints of people who are not applying in the correct weather. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. We want to know our emergency measures and we want to store properly. So we want to use chemicals in the way that they are labeled to be used. So what happens if we don't? What happens if I decide I am going to spray a chemical every year, regardless of if I have my pest or not? This is something that we see in beekeepers. There are some bacteria that can get into beehives and kill the beehives. So we have beekeepers that will apply antibiotics every spring if they have the bacteria or not. And this leads to bacterial resistance. So same in insects. We see insecticide resistance when we use the same insecticide over and over and over again. So the way we can prevent that from happening is we can rotate through the modes of action for different insecticides. So here in the gray on this little circle, the gray are different places where we may be using insecticides. And then up here across the top, we have the different modes of action. So some insecticides are muscle poisons. We've got some that will cause the insect to move until it dies. We've got one in grasshoppers that does that, and it actually causes them to jump until they die, and they'll actually jump, their back legs will come off. You can imagine that they die then. We've got some gut poisons that prevents them from being able to digest their foods. Of course, we have nerve poisons that either stimulate or prevent their nervous systems from functioning. Let's see. We've got respiratory poisons that they are breathing in. Insects don't have lungs. They don't breathe through their mouth or their nose, but they do have a respiratory system that the part that we can see on larger insects, it's going to be their spiracles. So running down the side of them, they have these little holes called spiracles that they breathe in and out. And then they have tubes inside their bodies that carry the oxygen to their muscles and to their different parts of their body. So they do have a respiratory system. It is not like ours as humans or what we see in mammals, but they do have that. And we have respiratory poisons. So those are some examples of modes of action. And I want to show you guys a little short video here. So this is can you guys see that? I hope you can. Will you give me a thumbs up if you can see this website? Yeah.
You can hear it or you can see it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So this is called the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee, and they are the committee. It's a worldwide committee that monitors for insecticide resistance, and they've got this website here where you can find information about it. This is also where you can find all of the information about modes of action for insecticides, and this is where the updated information is. So scientists are constantly looking for new modes of action to control insects. Now they are looking for modes of action that are more specific for certain types of insects. So we want things that will kill maybe lepidopteran caterpillars, but won't affect bees, things like that. So they're constantly looking for new modes of action that will control certain types of insects. So this is where you can find the information for insecticide resistance. So I'm going to show this little video that explains what resistance is and how it happens. It's only 3 minutes long. I promise it's not a super long.
International and the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee explain how to combat insecticide resistance. This farmer is called James. He loves his job and is very proud of his produce. To avoid insect damage to his crops, James has always used the same insecticide and never had a problem. This year, James is worried because his crops are infested and spraying his fields does not kill many of the insects. If this continues, the whole harvest could be destroyed. James can't understand why the insecticide that worked so well before is not working so well now. An insecticide loses its effect because the insects have developed resistance to it. In any population of insects, there is genetic variability. The variability may give some insects a natural protection from this insecticide. If the same insecticide is always used, only insects that have this advantage survive. These resistant insects reproduce and pass on their advantage. Over time, this selection process fills the fields with resistant insects that are not affected by the insecticide. Luckily, there are other insecticides that have different modes of action. This means they attack the insects in different ways. Great, but how can we stop the process repeating and new types of resistance developing? Researchers carried out studies that show that by spraying insecticides with different modes of action in rotation throughout the crop growing season, the insects are controlled and the chance of resistance developing is greatly reduced. James can find information about what mode of action an insecticide uses printed on many bottles, online, or by asking the retailer. All insecticides with the same number share the same or a similar mode of action, so James makes sure to pick ones with different numbers. The rotation of chemical insecticides is an important element of an integrated approach to combating resistance, along with non-chemical practices like pest monitoring, crop rotation, soil tillage, and the encouragement of predators. James is delighted. By rotating insecticides with different modes of action and by implementing integrated pest management practices, he has solved his insect problem in a sustainable way. This saves him money by increasing his yield and improving the quality of his produce. James also finds he does not need to apply insecticide as regularly and has more free time with his family. Farmers like James are not alone in the fight against insecticide resistance. In urban environments, mosquitoes can also develop resistance. This increases the spread of malaria and has a huge impact on public health. IRAC works everywhere to combat the development of resistance. If you would like to learn more about insecticide resistance and the work of IRAC, visit the IRAC website.
Okay. I always like there at the end where the farmer gets to spend more time with his family. I always think that's really cute. But I think that's a good video for teaching. If you are teaching someone about this, it's available online just at the IRAC website. So, but I think it's really easy for us to understand when it has these little pictures for us to look at. So The modes of action of insecticides, we can find them here on this IRAC website. They have this poster. So I just clicked on modes of action, and then they have a poster here that we can see. You can download that poster or you can look at it. There's also an Excel sheet with them all. I'm gonna hop back over to my PowerPoint. Oh, you couldn't hear? You couldn't hear the video? Shoot, I'm sorry. Well, the video is online. I'm sorry you couldn't hear it. The video is online. You can go and watch it. So let me see here. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. I have this poster on here. Okay, so this is what the poster looks like. If you look at it on the website, I know you can't read any of it, so I have zoomed into part of it so you can see what it looks like. So each one of these little squares has a group number, and that represents a mode of action. So here we've got group number 1, there's group number 2. Let me see. I'll talk about group number 3. So one example of a mode of action, this says it is a sodium channel modulator. So you don't know what that means. Can feel very confusing when you first look at it. A sodium channel modulator actually is a muscle poison and prevents the insect from being able to move. That's an easy way to think about it. Let's see. Okay. So that's an easy way to think about it, is that it is a muscle poison that prevents the muscle from being able to move. So if you were to go and look at this, you could see each one of these groups and it would tell you what that group means. If you're interested in it, you can look up a sodium channel modulator and you can read about exactly what they do. So where could you find these group numbers? So we can look at that chart and we can see them all, but what good does that do you as someone who's using insecticides? So the group number can actually be found on the label. So any label that you're buying should have a group number on it. I've got 2 examples here. I put an insecticide and then I also put Roundup because I think that Roundup is something that probably everyone has seen or heard of before. So we can see that there are group numbers for insecticides. There are also group numbers for herbicides. So Roundup would fall under an herbicide because it's controlling plants. So there are group numbers that represent these modes of action. You can look back at that chart. You can see what the mode of action is. And that is how you can rotate through them and make sure you're not using the same one over and over. So that kind of gives you the control in your hands if you understand a little bit more a little bit more about what those modes of action are. Okay. My computer keeps freezing. I don't know why. It's just like not having it today. So real quick, I'll talk a little bit about just 2 modes of action. I'm not going to talk about all of them because I am running out of time and because it's too much to cover with all the rest of this information. So I put an example here showing the nerve poisons that we can have for insects. So this lists each group number that falls under the nerve poison. And on that chart, all of them were blue. Okay. If we go down, we were to look at the ones on the poster that were green. These would all be growth inhibitors. So this is something that is going to prevent the insect from being able to go through its regular growth cycle. So we have some that mimic juvenile hormones. So insects have hormones that cause them to go through their life cycle development. So just like humans have hormones that when we hit puberty and we have all these hormones that cause us to have a bunch of zits and greasy hair and mood swings or whatever. I'm the parent of teenagers right now, so I'm very familiar with this. Those are our hormones that are causing us to go through our life cycle to become an adult. Insects have the same. So scientists have learned how to prevent them, how to utilize that to prevent them from being able to go through their life cycle. We also have things that prevent them from being able to molt when they are shedding. So those are growth inhibitors. If you have more questions about that, you're welcome to email me and ask me. Let's see. So these are some resources that I use. There are some really great resources online. So here's some things that you can use. So honeybees, I'm just going to skip through these real quick because I'm running out of time. But if you do run into a situation where you have honeybees in a structure and they are a problem, beekeepers want to help. They want to save those bees. Please don't spray them. I get calls from people who have sprayed them and then they want me to come and do a removal. And at that point, the bees are going to die. So if you're in the Amarillo Canyon area, we do have the Powder Bee Club. If you're in the Lubbock area, you guys have Caprock Beekeepers. The rest of the state of Texas, I don't have all the bee clubs memorized, but we do have the Texas Beekeepers Association. So that's down here, right here at the bottom. There's their website. And most bee clubs within the state of Texas are registered with them. So no matter what county you're in Texas, you should be able to find a bee club. If you can't find one, shoot me an email and I'll be more than happy to contact someone in that county to try to help you find it. A lot of times county extension agents will have that information available. So bees can be cut out of structures. That's what's happening here in these pictures where bees have moved into someone's home. Beekeepers use vacuums to vacuum all of the bees out of there. Then we can remove the comb and the wax and get those bees into a hive where they are wanted instead of in a structure where they are unwanted. So that's just real quick about bees. And I will stop there. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I feel like that was a whole ton of information, so I'm happy to retouch on anything you have questions about or anything else you want to ask. I'm happy to try to help with.
So I'll say you've been a lifesaver for us, the Palo Bee Club. We always scrambled trying to find beekeepers that, it was all hobbyist beekeepers, and we would refer it to them. You've got a wide pool of beekeepers in your club, and there's always somebody eager. So we haven't, well, we had one emergency treatment that somebody had already sprayed, so it wasn't beneficial to anybody. But other than that, we have not treated a hive since 2019. You guys have been able to take care of everything for us, and it's a dramatic number of situations. So
yeah, so no matter
please,
where you
everybody,
are,
use those resources.
yeah, no matter where you are, I encourage you to find your bee club. They probably have educational meetings. Go to their meetings, tell them who you are, tell them, we have bees and structures. We don't want to spray them. Who could we contact? That's how I met Jason. That's how I met a lot of guys that work in pest control in the Panhandle. And I get these calls during the summer. It's 3 or 4 a day that I get them, and I'm constantly sending them out to beekeepers, and beekeepers are contacting homeowners, and it's been a really great system for us. So I encourage you to find your local bee club and make friends with those people to get bees into safe places.
Yeah. Absolutely. And quick question: one of the primary issues from your talk that we run into as PCOs is major ant problems coming from aphids. So what would be a good suggestion for you to the audience that may not have a license to handle aphids, to handle the bees that are caused from a heavy aphid population?
Okay, so the ants that are coming in. So if we want to remove aphids in, say, a situation with homeowners, they've got some ornamental plants, we can actually spray aphids with a horticultural soap. We can spray them even with Dawn dish soap. Because they are little soft-bodied insects, we can control them with physical control like that. So a horticultural oil is going to coat their bodies and kill them. Dawn dish soap actually like dries out their bodies and causes them to rupture. So those are things that you don't have to have a license for. So if you're working on a smaller scale with homeowners, that is something that you can do. Aphids are often hiding on the underside of leaves, so we have to look there because they are trying to hide from the sun. They dry out pretty easily, so they're looking for somewhere that is protected for them. So if you're looking for them, look on the underside of leaves. Does that help?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It doesn't look like we have any more questions, and I really appreciate you jumping on, taking the time to join us. At the tail end of your study down there, where you're working your tail off to finish up back here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to talk insects anytime. So again, if anyone has questions, my email address is just right here, and I'm happy to help with whatever I can.
Marvelous. Thank you so much.